who is helping to sponsor bring John here to New Mexico. I want to thank the University of New Mexico School of Architecture and AIA Albuquerque for helping us bring John to New Mexico. He'll be with us for a week, hopefully culminating up in Santa Fe next weekend for the Earth USA 2015, an international conference on Earth and Architecture, and hopefully you can join us there as well. A few notes before I introduce John. Any architects that needing AIA credits, the AIA in New Mexico will give us credits for attending this lecture or John's lecture at the Solar Fiesta tomorrow, which we want you all to come to. It is going to be at the CNM school, and we will have many of the people in the industry there doing workshops, presentations, displaying various solar products, and we would love you all to attend. Also, tonight at Hacienda del Rio at 6:30, we're going to be hosting a reception for John, AIA, and the School of Architecture. We would love many of you students to come and join us, become part of NMSEA, see what we're about, and kind of take the reins from us old farts, because we're getting tired of it. I would love to introduce John Perlin, a gentleman I was introduced to through his book on Golden Thread, which has been in my library for about 20 years now. It's a real go-to book. He has since updated it to his new book, Let It Shine, 6,000-Year Story of Solar Energy. It's a wonderful read. It starts 6,000 years ago with early applications and follows various solar technologies on up to the future and even on Hurricane Sandy and the applications through that. So it's a wonderful book. It's amazing the things that have happened in the past that we're still trying to understand, learn from, and apply to the future. So from that, oh yeah, well, that's the book, Let It Shine, 6,000 Year History.
And just, if you want to get a book after the show, I'll sign it for you.
Yes, we brought a couple of cases of books, so anybody that's interested in the book, John will sign it. And like I said, it's a really good go-to book. It's probably the best comprehensive collection of solar history that there is. So this man is the expert. Let's all welcome John Perlin to New Mexico.
First of all, let me say that it's not only just it's not just a quote history, it's actually an idea book that Mark and I were actually talking about this, where people say, well, what's the value of history? Well, it's experience of people just like us, except they're dead and we're alive right now. And they were no dumber, maybe, and no smarter than we were, so we can really get a lot from their experiences, right? Because we only have a lifetime of, say, 70, probably a little longer years than that, but here's 6,000 years of experience in architecture that we can learn from. In fact, Mark and I went over, and we will see there's like 5 principles of solar architecture. One is orientation, avoiding the hot sun during the hotter times of the year, and B, catching all the sun's rays when it gets cold. B, and that's what we call orientation. B is using the house to hold in the heat, and that's what we call both the mass and the insulation. And then controlling it by various methods, as we'll see, and then also holding it in, because of the special quality of classes we'll see. So that's the prelude, and now we'll get to the story. Well, first of all, the Hit the lights. There we go. Okay, well, the main thing is the sun works for us if we work with it. And one of the biggest problems is we're working against it these days. As you can see, like in the wintertime in the northern hemisphere, the sun is always in the south and low in the sky. And during the summertime, it's usually, I should say it is, the sun in relationship to us is in the northeast during the morning hours, in the south for about 3 or 4 hours, and in the northwest for the rest of the day. And so it's actually, we don't have to rotate the houses, we just have to work on those principles, and we can really get a lot done without any other means but the house as a solar collector. So this is a story of how people, first of all, learn where the sun is during the year. And this was basically very simply a stick perpendicular to the ground, and you just follow the shadows throughout the year. And you learn where the solstices are, where the equinoxes are, and in between. And one of the most interesting things, I mean, this would come about 4,000 years ago. These people knew where the sun was or is. And most of the time, most of the people I've talked to, they think the sun rises in the east and sets in the west every day of the year. And so we can just, work on that, right? And totally boycott where the sun is when we need it, the south. And so, if anything, what's the value of my research is maybe go on an evangelical crusade, right? And teach in the United States where the sun in relationship to the earth is during the year, so that people don't do this random type of building. And you can ask questions during the presentation of your course. So what I learned was that people 4,000 years ago knew a lot more than most people do today. And so what people did in China 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000 years ago was build according to those principles. And you can see the house is like towards the north, facing the south onto a courtyard. So the sun can come in all the time during the winter time. And then you put a hat on the house, right? That's what we call control. And it keeps the sun off us during the summertime. So this is like a 4,000 or 5,000 year old model. It's a model of the first palisades in China. It morphed into what's called the traditional Chinese house, based on the same principles. Is that clear? So this is how China built over the last 6,000 years, and they continue to build. Except for the little interlude called communism, when they tried to aid the Russians. And the Russians were not into, they were just into throwing up slabs, just like we are. And here we see a country house. And when I talked to my Chinese helpers on this part of the book, they told me that even today, when you buy a house, if it has a south orientation, it can sell at a premium. And I heard from Mark and the other people that nobody notices that in New Mexico. The Chinese were not just content with building houses, they were also content, they also wanted to ensure that every house in the city could have a south orientation. So what they did is they had the streets going perpendicular, so every house could face south. What we call convergent evolution is the Greeks did the same as the Chinese did, but without any contact. They had the same problem, right? How to keep houses warm in winter and cold in summer, cool in summer. And so here we see like a condo in Olympus. One of the interesting things about my research is I found a lecture by Socrates on how to build with solar architecture. And he talked about all the principles I just talked about. Build houses to the south, cover them, right, with the overhang, so the high summer sun is high over our heads, and when the sun is low, it comes into our rooms. Real simple ideas, but and here we see a whole solar city called Olympus. In fact, here's how all the main rooms were facing, were on the north facing south, with a portico, covered porch, and the courtyard. Mark was talking about that too, how important courtyards are, because they allow the air and the sun in. And the interesting thing is, all the houses, people say, well, we might be approaching the solar era now. We had a continuous solar era in China for 6,000 years, and we had a solar era in Greece from 500 BC to 200 BC. In fact, all the houses that are found in archaeological digs follow this idea. And here we see a whole solar city called Priene. Here we see terraced houses so each floor could have a commanding view of the south. So this gives you the idea that it's not just a dogmatic rule. The architect can play around according to the terrain. Now the Romans enhanced solar architecture with the invention of clear window glass. Window glass has an amazing property, and that is it allows the sun in, but when the sun gets changed, I should say the sunlight gets changed, it's turned into heat waves. It's too long to escape through the glass, and so it heats up. And as I try to tell people, it's very simple. Photons, which is sunlight, light is particles of energy, right? All it does is makes molecules move faster. And molecules moving faster is heat, right? And so the Romans, because they had window glass, they called these new buildings heliocamini, which means solar furnaces. In fact, they did, some people doubted whether this really worked. They used this to heat the baths. And they claimed that they got all their heat during a sunny day in the wintertime at 30 degrees Fahrenheit in Rome. And these physicists from Cornell didn't believe it. So they built a model, and they found indeed during a clear winter day at 30 degrees, they got the desired 100 degree Fahrenheit to heat the baths just from the masonry, insulation, control, and the glass. That simply, or an orientation. And perhaps Vitruvius is taught in this school of architecture, and Vitruvius has all the principles. Vitruvius actually was a mechanical engineer with the army, and he was stationed in Greece where he saw solar at work as a young man. And then he applied it to Rome. And all the baths in Rome, and believe me, baths in Rome were what kept Romans happy. As long as you kept the baths warm, the Romans would be behaving citizens. And solar kept the Roman Empire intact by keeping everyone happy. So if anyone tells you if solar energy plays any kind of role, just tell them it kept Rome happy with hot baths. And these baths were huge, like thousands of people, would cavort in them during the afternoons. People would work maybe in the morning, and in fact, that's how you got those long, siestas, is in the afternoons, everyone would go bathing. Not a bad life, right? I mean, better than working until 5 and then getting caught up in gridlock, right? And here we see, one of the big maps, we see the importance of orientation. Orientation was so important to the Romans that they passed, and this is something else, history as the future. They passed sunlight laws. Having, buildings that getting sunlight was so valuable that if a person obstructed that, they had to compensate you for all the fuel you had to buy. It's actually written in the Digestia, which we have today. It's a collection of Roman laws. So if anybody tells you that history is past, basically, we're not even in the past. And by learning from what our ancestors have done, we may have a better future. Now, these are called fruit balls. What they did was they laid out an angle, just like 1600s, to catch the solar heat so that plants would grow quicker. And this is from the book Fruit Balls Rediscovered. And 1699, the guy did sun angles for all the entire latitude of the Earth. A very popular way of enhancing heat collection in cooler places of Europe. And here we see, bringing the mountain to Mohammed, sort of like, where every day you would bring out your trees to your greenhouse, glass trapping the solar heat, right? And there you have like your trommel, as they call it, a wall that absorbs the solar heat and then pushes that heat, or radiates, I guess is a better word, that heat up to the plants. Because you have to understand, and this is getting a little bit of controversy, for about 900 years people forgot about glass, people forgot about building with the sun, because we had a religion called Christianity. And Christianity believed in faith, not knowledge. It was only during the Renaissance that people started studying not Christianity, but started studying Greeks and Romans, that they once again got into science. In fact, just to show you how horrible it was, we get all angry at the ISIL people and all that. Well, what happened is that this mob of Christians, couldn't be worse, was a woman who's also a scientist in 300 BC. And so her name was Hypatia. Look up Hypatia. Hypatia is the true victim of demagoguery against science. They just hacked her to pieces, giving people a lesson not to build with it. Actually, solar energy is the beginning of science, because learning all these principles through observation, through testing, and that's what science is, rather than through dogmatism. In fact, I didn't even think about it until this lecture. That's what I love about giving lectures, because everything just sort of comes out of my mind. And that's the whole beauty of science. Science is not because this person says it so, or we build from a false premise, but what we see, and we're always correcting ourselves too, because as science evolves, we have better ways of seeing. And the same thing with solar orientation. And that's what I hope I leave with you, is that the reason why we have so much hope in this ancient way of doing things is because we have better tools today to even make things improved. And that's the real frustration, is that we're not using those tools. And here we see a very important thing. Once again, what I talked about was controls. At night, they would put down curtains to hold in the heat. So here we're seeing throughout history how to build today. Ideas for the today and for the future. And then also, this became very popular in New Mexico, is bringing the greenhouse into the south part of the house. And so you have, in wintertime, the joy of the plants and also the joy of the sun during the daytime. And if you close it off at night, you have a very toasty house. And much to the chagrin of people who want to sell you fuel, you don't need them. Now this is a very simple device that showed just how much glass could trap solar heat. It was built in 1767. 2 panes of glass. And you can do this experiment yourself. 2 panes of glass, a insulated box, the interior painted black and face towards the sun. You can get temperatures up to 300 degrees with this very simple device. This device went on to prove the reason why it's cold up in higher mountains and warmer in the plains has nothing to do with the sun itself, but has to do with the atmosphere. And the glass imitates the atmosphere. And this became the tool in the 19th century on how to describe how the atmosphere regulates the heat of the Earth. In fact, with this tool, they discovered in 1856, and this is the craziness of living when you know all this, that CO2 in 1856 was the main component that held in and then radiated the heat back to the Earth through this model that was built in 1767. And the reason I show this is to show you the significance of glass. This is a 1649 passive house that I visited in Germany. You see how the south face, see how the east and the west have very few fenestrations? And the reason why I show this because this guy lived in that house for 20 years as the court physician in Bookieburg. And suddenly he had this vision. He said, I see it. Living in this house for 20 years, suddenly I understand. It's the heat of the sun. That is the most precious commodity we have. But he said, should we build the house to the southwest? To the north? He said, no, living in this house, I see, and then he began his great book, the first book ever written on solar architecture. All men should face their houses to the midday sun. And I actually got the book translated, and there's only 3 copies in the world. But he had lots of influence. And this is his Sonnenstadt, which means solar city. Just like the Chinese, just like the Greeks, all houses could face the south. Also, they would be made of adobe, and the roofs would be flat. And fortunately, he had a lot of influence. There's the model. He had a lot of influence because of the state architect of Bavaria discovered his writings and became his mouthpiece. And suddenly he convinced the kings of Prussia and of Bavaria to begin big solar building programs throughout those states in the 1820s. They also started a school of solar architecture that had thousands of students in 1824 based on this guy Bernhard Kirchhoff's ideas. They were called Sonnenbauer, which means solar building principles, which I hope I convey today. And here we see solar schoolhouses built according to solar building principles. Here we see, actually, it's still extant. It's called the Sun Palace of King Joseph Maximilian that were built according to Bernhard Kirchhoff's plans. And this city of Schoenbrunn took the Sonnenstadt and built the whole city according to solar building principles, and is extant today. And the UNESCO World Heritage Sites features this, and said that what they say is that the reason for it being featured is because of the solar building principles. So you can go visit that in Switzerland. Also, it's interesting because probably this will ring a bell, is Corbusier was from the city. Then the Germans, another century later, rediscovered solar architecture, and here we see it became a huge movement. It dominated all the architectural journals, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people lived in solar buildings. And here we see a large school built on those principles. How am I doing for time, Mark? I'm gonna take a break for a second, okay? I'll be right back. But think of questions that you might want to ask. We'll stop here and think of questions, and then I'll go on with the rest. And Gropius built houses facing east-west with disastrous results. You know, hot in summer, and there's no sun in the east and west during winter. Because unlike Gropius, let's see if I can. Does anybody know how to move this backwards?
Go to previous?
No, I'm working with a mouse and the previous doesn't work. But anyway, I can explain. Heinrich Meyer, and this is very important for architects. So architecture is science. So he went to Davos, which had the best meteorological school for solar heat, and studied where where the solar was, the solar resource was when he wanted it. And so he totally created a revolution in German architecture in the 30s. You have to understand, this is very interesting too. The idea of social justice was the primary mover for architecture in Germany between the two world wars. Because you have all these poor people who couldn't heat their houses. And so the way you would provide this heat is through solar energy. According to Heinrich Meyer, he called it making the house into a sun cell, a solar cell. And so this took a big burden off the German workers who were very poor. And so it's solar energy, that's what's really, I think, for me at least, is so wonderful, is it helps out in so many ways. And, think of this. I mean, it's just a beautiful, is there a cloud in the sky today here? No. It's like having a pipeline where it's just pouring out its fuel because you had a rupture. The corporation would be very concerned. We sort of have this pipeline from the sun that's been ruptured because nobody's using it. And photons are energy, and photons are sunlight. In fact, that was the great discovery of Einstein. That light consists of energetic particles. I don't know if this was Einstein. Actually, Einstein won the Nobel Prize for this, rather than relativity. The discovery of that sunlight, light, not heat, is energetic. So this, I actually stayed in this, it's called Bernal by Berlin. I actually stayed in the structure for 3 days. That was kind of funny too, is the people who ran it, the guy who was head of it, he taught English at the Brandenburg State Police Academy. So I was asked to do an English class for detectives. I've never done that before in my life. And see, they freed me. So this still stands today. I spent, about 2 years ago, I spent like 3 days and it's beautiful. It's an amazing, this could be such a stimulus for architects because it brings in, it's an amazing building, because not only it brings in the sunshine, but it brings in nature. And you feel like in the building, you're part of the forest. And Hannes Meyer is one of the least, one of these greats who is not recognized. And the other thing he did was he built thousands of solar homes that actually brought the Bauhaus money. And the only reason we don't know about him today is he was left wing, and we only admitted the more right wing architects who were refugees from Nazi Germany. Here we see another, the whole movement of solar architecture, like in the 30s, in the 20s and 30s, moved all throughout Europe. And here we see a solar community in it's in a suburb of Zurich. And what happened is this is really interesting. This is unintended results because they built this for the hygienics of the sun. The sun is hygiene. And then they discovered their heating bills were almost zero. And they said, wow, it really, it's not only a hygienic resource, it's a heating resource. So this is how I discover things too a lot of the times, is serendipity. And the movement went all the way to Stockholm. So it was like encompassing all of Europe, solar. But as you probably know, there became a sea change in Germany in the 30s. It's called Nazism. And this became the model for Hitler of what architecture should look like. The medieval house with very few windows, very stark, and with the sloping roofs. In fact, what's really interesting in my research was this is flowering in the 20s and 30s of modern architectural journals in Germany. And then as Hitler gained more and more power, you see them getting thinner and thinner. This is at the Getty Museum, where they have all the German solar architectural journals. And then suddenly in 1934, they ceased publication. So solar was killed by Nazism because they said that solar architecture was Judaic. And you don't want to be working in any kind of Judaic stuff under Adolf. And now we get to New Mexico. And this is sort of the same kind of architecture as we saw in Greece and in China. It's called Acoma, is that how you pronounce it? Mm-hmm. And you see, as not being a New Mexican native, but I believe I can learn a few things, is the longest-standing populated urban area in America, I believe. And it's all solar, built on the same principles. So here we see, once again, what really fascinates me, this idea of, should I explain convergent evolution from an anthropological point of view? Okay, convergent evolution is you have a problem that's solved similarly by unrelated families, right? Like birds get wings, insects have wings, and mammals have wings, bats. All responding to a similar problem and resolving it similarly, but having no genetic relationship. And so this is what happened in architecture. A similar problem, probably most of the time a problem with fuel. Seeing that the sun is very inexpensive, that no one has yet found a way to meter it. And C, building with principles that will take advantage of that. And we can still do this today. And here we see like the house on Cape Cod in the early days, where once again, the main area faces south, and the minor area that faces the north. Aristotle wrote, we do this to avoid the cold winds from the north and catch the sun in the south. And that's how we built these houses in Massachusetts. Now, here we have the other component of importance in solar architecture. It's called analysis. And here we see the work in 1907 of Atkinson, where he took a window facing each direction and showing the various penetrations according to where they're placed. During the year, for example, during the summer solstice, we see that the northwest orientation gets lots of sun. The southwest gets less, and the south gets the least. And what they did was they used what was called a heliodome. I don't know, do they still use heliodomes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they mount a house, a little model house, on a moving board, and then they have a light that goes up and down that imitates the various months of the year. And what they found with that was exactly what the Greeks, the Chinese, and all that figured out. Was in summer solstice in the north you get sun, northwest you get even more sun, west you get a lot of sun, southwest you don't get as much sun, and south you get the least sun. And then the equinoxes, nothing in the north, a little bit in the northwest, a lot in the west, of course, a lot in the southwest, and a minor amount in the south. And then the south orientation is almost primarily wintertime bonanza. And following these studies, we get like a solar architectural revolution in, of all places, Chicago. And there's George Fredkeck, who initiated it. And he was influenced by the refugees coming in from Germany. And Chicago became the center, the solar center, and it was called the solar home. And it was, in 1944, as I say, the most talked about home in America. And originally, He did a little bit of demonstration and then found that this indeed worked. And so then he built what we would see a Chicago, say, version of what's happened in New Mexico. And here we see a picture of a lady with the dog and the cat getting the sun's rays in the wintertime. Actually, when it was -5 degrees outside, the thermostat turned off the furnace in this home. The whole idea, and that's what I talked about control, is keeping that sunlight, that sun heat in, and avoiding it at times you don't want it to be hot. And Chicago has thousands and thousands of solar homes like these. And here we see baby boomer jumping out of the screen, and his parents like sitting it easy by their solar home. This became the talk of America in 1945 with all the soldiers returning. So solar was going to become the *1 type of architecture in America. And this is an interesting slide because it shows both, again, you see the solar collectors above? They were mechanical, so it's very complex, and you have to have pumps and all that. And then you see the glass. Those brought in the solar sun, like I've talked about. And by putting drapes in and requiring the people who live in there to close them at night, they discovered in this house that the very complex solar pumped collectors produce less energy than this very simple way of doing the same thing. However, what happened is that the people who were in the solar bureaucracy maintained to use these very complex systems. And in New Mexico, they started to simplify it by, this is Steve Baer's house. They used it by putting drums facing them south, and then protecting it, once again, using the sun, using glass to trap solar heat. It's called a drum well. But another architect, David Wright, visited instead of going to Greece, instead of going to China, he visited, I think it's called Vatican. It's a cliff dwelling in Arizona. And he was amazed when the ranger told him that in the wintertime, even though it's freezing by the creek, above the creek, it's about 70, 80 degrees. So he began to think about all this, mass, like absorbing and then radiating the heat out, and then protecting the homes in summertime with the cliff overhang. And he began to think, why not just have the house itself as a solar collector? And so David Wright in 1972 built the first house that was completely heated by the sun. You see the two collectors there? He never connected them because the house worked so well. And everybody warned him that he was going to have a terrible winter if he didn't have those collectors. He also had radiant pipes in the floors, which he never used, of course.
That's what's sticking out of the wall there on the bottom.
Okay, yeah, that's what, see, it was going to be connected to those heaters. And one winter evening, he was sitting with a bunch of people, and he asked, well, what type of home do I have? And they said, well, they were engineers, they said, because it's not connected to any kind of pumps or anything like that, it's not mechanical. So it must be, and then they coined the word that day, that evening, passive. It's passive because the sun itself, because the house itself is a solar collector. And so he sort of looked at it as a thermos model where the insulation was in the outside foam, it's foam. And at night, the thermos was corked by the drapery, so it was all like kept inside. And this house still stands today and still collects like 90% of the heat during the Santa Fe winter. And this is how the passive solar movement began. And here we see the house that became iconic for the passive solar movement in the world. New Mexico, Santa Fe, New Mexico again, a greenhouse, as we saw earlier, attached to the house and closed off during the nighttime. And as Doug Balcom said, it was very easily to, once again, the controls were very easy. All you had to do was shut the door. So what I'm trying to say is we can be very simple or very complex. You have this complex network of gas refineries, of oil coming all over the world, or we can just build a house and do it right. And if we build a house and do it right, they calculated that if we start building like this all over America, and this was done in the 1970s, this calculation, we would never have to go to Alaska for oil. So the whole idea of this presentation, and there you see the sun coming in. There you see like an added help using walls to collect the solar heat as part of the building. And then it radiates the heat into the building. And here we see interesting, and there's now people, once again, the whole question of what's the value of history. Here we see photovoltaics being used for the oldest way of using solar energy. We see both the most modern with the most ancient. The collectors keep the sun off during the summertime. They also keep the sun off the roof. And they're collecting electricity to cool the house when it needs it. So here's a combination. I really like this slide because it shows you can use photovoltaics as a building material to accomplish what the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks and what we can do today using masonry, the ideas of masonry with semiconductors. And basically, I hope if I leave you with anything, is if we study on how to make maximum use of the sun for our houses, we can actually eliminate the cost of global warming. So I hope you like the presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. And afterwards, if you want a sign up for discount today, special lecture discount at $25, and it'll be signed too. Yeah.
I'm curious, are you optimistic about transforming the massive structures we built that weren't passive solar to become more effective in their solar utilization?
Preach the solar gospel, right? My name's John, and I'm the Gospel of John. First of all, you need several things. The first thing is, we'll make it totally religious, right? First of all is confession. But the confession of global warming is real. And that global warming is caused, it's very simple, okay, it's very simple. For my mind, I love simplicity. And the simplest argument about why global warming is real, and this is something else I've been working on, is during the Carboniferous period, there was a great burial of carbon, right? And the Earth cooled down because of the taking out of carbon out of the atmosphere and burying all that carbon, right? Which became coal. Now, in the 1850s, people more and more began to believe that coal was not a rock, but was fossilized trees and plants. And so we were sort of like foolish children, right? And we went on this digging up what was very brilliantly sequestered. And now that we're burning all that material that made the Earth the possibility for life, it's very simple. We're getting the same results. We're leaving the Carboniferous for a period which is called the Devonian, when the only large animals could live in the sea because the sea protected them, A, from the heat, and two, is the other dangerous part of global warming is it removes the ozone layer. And so they had to have the water, right, to the mediator from the ozone, from the ultraviolet that was coming through, right, and as a mediator for the heat. It was only when the fluorescence of plants, of trees, came about that took down that carbon dioxide. It made it paradise for large animals to come on Earth. Is that clear? And now we're changing it back to a time when, to the age of fishes. So all you guys get gills and fins and join the devolution of the Earth, right? So that has to be like drummed in. I mean, it's just good science. And once we see that there's a problem, like the rest of the world does, then to ameliorate things becomes becomes the most important activity on Earth. And doing it the simplest ways, like I've shown, will resolve the problem. Is that clear? So we have.
I wonder many times about the efficacy of using rammed earth in mid-rise and even high-rise buildings.
Well, we don't have to. Well, that's the whole point of this lecture is to learn. We don't have to copy. We can use this as a template. Say, well, how do we resolve this problem? You know, and we can use, for example, as building material, photovoltaics, for example. You know, so we don't have to. I mean, I hope I haven't this wasn't a dogmatic sermon. It was showing how people resolve problems, and our challenge is to resolve the problems in our own way. But to realize that building with the sun rather than against it is crazy. And how do we build with the sun? Using our analytics, using our we have much better glass today. For example, we have very responsive glass. We can go into all the differences, and that's the whole point of this lecture, is to think on how we can use the sun for better living in each of our homes. And I hope that came across today. And so each home, once again, this is the law of aggregates, right? Is that each home only consumes a little bit of energy, but when you multiply it by billions, it becomes a problem. And I think heating houses like 40% of the global warming pie. Heating and cooling especially. And I think the last slide, one of the interesting things about photovoltaics is when put on the roof, because they use the energy of the photon, it no longer will move molecules to heat the house. Is that clear? Just like it's cooler in a forest for two reasons. One is the shade, but two is also the absorption of the leaves of the photons. And no one thinks of that. So you're eliminating the cause of the heat, which is the photon. So basically, you have two things happening. Trees fight for photons. But the tree that's highest gets the most photons, right? So and it eliminates, that's why forests are like cooler in summer and warmer in winter. And if we build our houses in the same way that trees have taught themselves how to create this mediated environment, we've got it made. So that's a real question. Are trees smarter than people? Another question? If you'd like to come up and ask a question, I'd be glad to answer. That's why I'm here. Yeah?
I have a question concerning insulation of homes.
Sure.
I know here in New Mexico, we get the sun all day in the winter, but we have a phenomenon where it's colder in the house than it is outside. I don't know if anybody else experiences that. You have to go outside to get warm here in the winter. I'm from the east, and we had insulation and all that stuff really heavy there, but they don't have it here. So why would you have the phenomenon of a home being cool in the winter?
Oh, because it's not insulated, right?
So
I don't know. I don't live in New Mexico.
Right, but I mean, do other people experience that in the winter here?
Yes,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
the old adobe houses you go into, they can have a tendency to be like that, but part of it is thermal lag effect, I think.
Well, the new
Where
houses
it cools
too.
off all night long, and then it takes a while during the day for it to heat up again.
Right, but we're looking at it's not heated up until the sun is way in the west.
Well, it's not in the west.
setting.
It's not in the west in the wintertime.
Well, but it's,
It's moving
I
towards
hope
the
you
west.
learned that.
Yeah. I think you might also be experiencing the thermal lag of Adobe. And
Okay, but
an
this is
Adobe
the-
house
it's
that
like-
doesn't have insulation or poor insulation
It's not Adobe.
will stay cold.
It's not Adobe. So it depends on your windows and insulation.
See, that's all you learned.
Walls aren't insulated with this frame, so
Yeah,
it tends to be cold.
but it's massive.
Even Adobe
That's the
can be
thing.
cold. If you go outside, you're on the south side, you got the solar temperature. Like the Anasazi used to do, they work outside on the south side, they get the reflection off of that wall to the back, and you'll be very warm and very comfortable outside, even when it's 30 degrees outside, because you have that solar insulation hitting you and the walls and the surfaces around you. You have convective warm air coming up, as the Anasazi do. So yeah, I can understand that you can feel warmer outside than inside. But the trick is open up to that outside, let that sun into the house, and you've got the best of both worlds.
so it's not a thing about insulation.
See.
Well, insulation is kind of part of
Yeah,
it.
but part of it, but see, the thing is also, your house probably wasn't oriented, it was probably facing east-west, and it probably
No,
wasn't.
the primary windows are on the south,
Mhm.
but it's still
it gets
cold.
Well, get some drapes. Close it all, you're gonna.
Move.
Well, I hope I conveyed some interesting ideas, and I thank you for coming here, and a lot of pleasure.